Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Jacob Silverblade. Today I've got a bit of a different video for you. We're going to be going through two things. First off, I'll be covering what I think is the best Ultramarine deck at the moment, what I believe is to be the best, what I've come across after lots of different playtesting to seeing if different vehicle decks kind of work, different like what is it? BJ's big guard deck, see if that worked, see all the decks, see what worked, what didn't, that sort of thing. And then I'll be going through the changes, which I still believe need to be made, to Warpforge with the Ultramarines. I believe the Ultramarines are still the weakest faction, even below Tal, still at this point. However, we're not that far behind Tal right now. That's because Tal isn't that great. And I think both factions could really use some kind of buff just to bring them in line with everybody else. So, here we are. Here's the changes that I'm going to be going through. I won't be going through this, but this is what I've sent to Warpforge in an email. So, yes, we'll be going through that. Hope to see you next part. So, we've got the Ultramarines, and we're going to go through a couple of different decks. We're going to be going through, basically, this is my last deck, and I'm going to go through some of the decks which have been changed. Well, changed, I mean, tested with to see what was good, what worked and sort of things, and then ultimately the deck which I went for this season to climb back up to where I am right now. Basically some of the decks we've tested, you got this deck which is quite an interesting one. It's trying to go for this sort of combo. So if you go to the mana curve, you'll see we've got a lot of 1-drops, and we've got specifically, we go to editing, well, we don't need to go to editing the deck, but we got a Lieutenant Calus and we got a Sergeant Talion, and basically in combination with all those 1-drops, what you can do is that you can basically do something like 24 damage to the opponent's face, maybe even more if you get it all off right, because you could tactical insight into a free energy drop. That's why we've got quite a few of those. And yeah, that's how it basically works. You're trying to do a massive combo at 11 energy, finish off the opponent in like a singular turn. It's decently good, however it's certainly not the best. What I found is, in all reality, that, let's get rid of that you're better off just going for a generic sort of deck with Calgar, trying to do the same thing. So you're better off getting Activity, all this stuff, Scout, you know, just standard sort of deck, rather than specifically trying to go for combo. Whereas this has more like, you got like Hero's Respite for card draw and stuff like that, and trying to go for this crazy sort of combo play. Calgar, on the other hand, doesn't have that sort of like combo. It still has it. It still has the Lieutenant Calus. It still has Sergeant Talion, but don't try and purposely go for combo. Whereas this, you would try and purposely set up combo, deal with Lieutenant Calus and Sergeant Talion to finish the opponent off in about one singular turn. You can easily take them from 18 to 0 in like a single turn. It's very powerful doing that. However, it's not consistent. It's certainly when we get to the higher rankings of ladder with Ultramarines, it's not consistent at all. When you get to this sort of stage, like top 10 beyond this point, I've found I've very much struggled from getting from 290 and above with that sort of style of deck. So I had to revert back to just playing a basic kind of style of deck with Calgar. And at that point, if you're going to do that, I'm afraid you're better off just playing Chaplain of Avarice. Doesn't mean the Chaplain of Avarice hasn't improved. So this is the deck that I was using before last season, when we had the, well, we didn't have Antonio Cronus, but we had Hellblaster instead. But yeah, this is pretty much the deck. We had double Aggressor Sergeant and that sort of thing. Then there's a couple of changes which I've tried to test out with. We added the Outrider instead of one of the Hero's Respites. So here we have double Hero's Respite. And then we got the Triumph War Veteran. And that's because his stats were increased for 4 life. And yeah, it's not a bad drop if you play on free energy. So I wouldn't be panicking if you do that. And it's quite a decent drop. It's just another thing you can do. But ultimately, what I've gone for is the ultimate deck. It's something like this. You still got Infiltrators, Firstborn, Hero's Respite, you know, point blank shot. I have tested it without any Hero's Respite and just trying to rely on Gather the Company. It's just not been consistent enough. Yes, if you get Gather the Company, trust me, you've got plenty of card draw. You're perfectly fine with Pistol Librarian, for example. Particularly if you do a slight change later on where Tony Kronos can actually start drawing you a card. But I found it's just not been consistent enough without this Hero's Respite. Otherwise, you end up getting sort of like screwed over in terms of cards, and then you just run out of cards. So it's just something to be wary of, that with Chaplain of Varus, you can't exactly do that. But yeah, with all these changes, this is roughly what I went for like the most. I will say that the only thing in question is that if we create a new copy in deck, put it over here. This is the plus build. Let's go to this one. Let's edit it. The one thing you can do, which I think I mentioned before, is that you can take out the Aggressor Sergeant. Where is it? There you are. And you can put in a Outrider. This sort of just sorts out your mana curve a little bit. It makes it a bit more clean. It also allows you to get another flank play. And 3-drops are really important in this deck. They're like the linchpin of this deck. At the end of the day, they are very powerful. Oh, I copied the deck again. Yeah, here we go. They are the linchpin of this deck. So you can either go for either one. So you can go for the Aggressor or so and so. What I will say is that flanks are crazy important. They sort of control the board. With Chaplain of Varus, you can use them to heal them up, and then they become a pain to remove. You're able to control that board and point where you get Aggressor Sergeant. The only thing downside is there's 2 downsides. First off, you might struggle just later on when you get, because you only have 1 5 energy drop. You might struggle to get a good decent 5 energy drop, and you'll always have to pretty much gather the company, whereas having the Aggressor Sergeant might be nicer. Secondly, even though Sergeant Talion, there's a bonus for, sorry, not Sergeant Talion, Tony Kronos can draw that Outrider. It's the only vehicle in your deck, so it will guarantee to get you that Outrider, and it will give it 2 armor, which is very powerful if you manage to get Tony Kronos to draw that card. You may not still even want to, even if you have a Tony Kronos out. But I will say is that it doesn't synergize that well with Gather the Company, of course. So you won't be refilling that one if you end up drawing to Outrider. It's still not terrible. Don't get me wrong. You can still, oh my god, you could still absolutely trigger Codex afterwards, which is what you want to be doing with Gather the Company, getting that double Codex trigger off. It really helps in that sense. And you still only got 6 Strash Gems, so you can either go for 6 or you can basically go for the 7 with the Outrider if you're feeling a bit more risky. But it will give you that slight consistency, I suppose, with Gather Company. But really, the main thing is that you have a 5 energy drop, which is this one, so you have 2 5 energy drops with Sergeant Talion instead of more 3 drops. The choice is yours, basically, which one you feel more comfortable with. Now, I will say there's one major change with all of this, and that is Sergeant Talion himself. I've just found him to be very just generically powerful. Initially, I didn't like him, so I wasn't including him in my Chaplain of Varus deck, but I've grown to like him with exploring this sort of combo sort of build. You can always go for Marnius Calgar and just go for the generic build, and that's where I've learned that actually Sergeant Talion is very powerful just to play on curve of just generally, because if they don't have something on board and they don't have flank play, Sergeant Talion, which is pretty much what you're going to do the same thing with an Aggressor Sergeant, for example. Sergeant Talion does slightly better because they do play something. It's got snipes, so he's going to take that out. He's hard to remove in a way because it's got that camouflage. So it's really nice versus Erica, for example, which I've seen quite a bit right now. Because they can't get that free damage and can't be stunned whilst the camouflage is there. So it's rather useful, and it can combo off. So we do have some 1-drops here, and if you have, like, for example, a Chaplain, which sometimes I do, you can play Chaplain, he ends up not dying, you Sergeant Talion, and then you add +2 to the entire board. For example, Octavius Infiltrator afterwards, you then have a Chaplain who will probably have 5 attack beforehand, so now has 7 attack, Sergeant Talion, which will have 5, then 8 attack. Like, it gets crazy powerful very quick, and then that becomes just a serious threat, which you can use with Chaplain just keeping it all alive. Really, that's the Chaplain's job, keeping your battle brothers alive. So yeah, that's the best deck, and we'll go through some of the changes now. Right, now we've got to the stage where we're going to talk about 2 things: the Strash Gems and also the troops. We're going to go over 6 Strash Gem changes and 6 troop changes to try and make the Ultramarines a better faction in general. Shouldn't have this, it's not needed here. I'm going to be fairly quick. you can look at my PDF if you want to see exactly why I want to see those changes. I've put down into, like, you know, explained it more thoroughly into words, that sort of thing. But basically the first thing is tactical insight. I'm changing it to 0 energy, trigger the codex of a friendly unit. This is a good in-between point between it where it is right now and then where it was before. You won't get the extra literal refill of 2 energy. So for example, your warlord won't be able to just simply like use its warlord talent, such as virus, when you're able to give +1 to the board, for example. You weren't able to get your exemplary warrior thing, and Calgar particularly weren't able to draw a card. The reason why I particularly talk about Calgar is that throughout this time, most of the time Calgar has been the best warlord, and his ability to just draw cards generically is quite powerful. Excuse me. So with that out of the way, tactical insight won't be able to do that. So you won't get the advantage of having refilled your hand and still not be behind in cards. That's, I feel like, was the purpose of tactical insight. You get a big tempo turn, but then you're behind in cards. Calgar just completely alleviates that, like, that downside with its talent. So I would say that that's a good, decent change. It's still very much a playable card. It's not going to be a meta-defining card, I don't think. However, it's going to be a very good sort of tempo, on-play card, / an emergency situation card. For example, with a Justiciar, it doesn't stun the target you want to, able to trigger a Codex again, and then able to stun the right target, sort of thing. So that's what I'd love to see. Next up, we're going to go into the 4 energy section, and I do mean the entirety of the 4 energy section. And I just, bit of a preface when talking about all these cards here. We've got 2 things when it comes up to this. Ultimately struggle with controlling the board. What I mean is dealing with a wide board. That's where it changes the Storm Raven, and particularly the Death from Above. It's going to be very, very important. And then when it comes to late game, they just often just able to too easily get beat down by all the troops and stuff, and that's when I get into battlefield supremacy and particularly armored support and how to change that, so that people can't just directly punch you in the face with their stuff. They actually have to deal with your stuff, and it means that you're, because example, you use battlefield supremacy to get your vehicles cheaper, so you want to be playing vehicles to deal with stuff. That's the most value, but guess what, you're so low on life, you actually have to play like Vanguard troops or removal troops to be able to play, to actually deal with their stuff. Then you can play the vehicles. And quite often you can't do both at the same time. So you're either going behind, which is never good, or they just kill you, which is not good either. So with those 2 things out of the way, we're going to go into these 4 stratagems. Arm support, I'm basically saying instead of, not instead of, it will be in addition to giving 1 armor, give Vanguard. Basically, all your vehicles will now have Armor 1 and Vanguard. Not only will be more survivable, but they actually protect you and maybe some of your key troops. For example, your Antonio Cronus. No, Antonio Cronus? Yes, Antonio Cronus. And then your Tech Marine, Primus Tech Marine. They're very, very good support troops, and it always made sense that people aren't trying to shoot at this Space Marine right here, but the ginormous Dreadnoughts. And hence, giving them Vanguard, I really appreciate that. I think that'll make this far more of a playable card. I don't think it'll necessarily be good. It might not be good. However, it'll be certainly far more playable. Next up is Battlefield Supremacy. Battlefield Supremacy is a minor change. It's really within change when it comes to armor defensive. It's still the same cost. It still does mostly the same thing. It just makes all your vehicles cost 1 less, regardless of where they've come from. So the rest of the battle, your vehicles cost 1 less, instead of just specifically hand and deck. The reason why that's important is because armor defensive is something which is outside your hand and deck. It doesn't decrease the cost of stratagems at the end of the day. And when these vehicles get generated, they don't cost 1 less by Battlefield Supremacy. So it just didn't make sense that the cards don't synergize with each other, when really they should have. So I would change Battlefield Supremacy so that it does that minor thing, so that you can really, really go into the game with the armor defensive and actually see plays with that. So next up, when I go to Death from Above, basically Death from Above has the problem that it's really good in some situations and bad in others. Good when your opponents are really low on life and you're able to use Death from Above to claim lethal. That's when it's brilliant. When it's really bad is when you have it in your hand and 4E, you have no other 4E troop, and your opponent just played a 5 health troop, so Death from Above doesn't even kill it. Yeah, it's not fun when that happens. So I'm suggesting to make the change that if the target dies, draw a card, kind of like point blank shot. That way you don't go behind in actual value, you gain some sort of value back by playing Death from Above. The final thing I'd say is Storm Raven. This is another card I want changed. Basically, Storm Raven doesn't actually deal with dealing the board. It only does 2 damage to all troops. When the board is full of 3 health troops, it doesn't really work. So I want to change it simply so that it does, instead of 2 damage, it does 3 damage. But I would change it to, well, this is what I need to preface, is that I'd say I'd make it only troops. So instead of doing damage to face, you've already got enough face things with death from above, point blank shot. You know, you got Lieutenant Calus. There's a lot of face damage with Ultramarines. They can easily do that already. They don't need a Storm Raven doing that also. That's my first point. So you can only do damage to troops. But then I'll make it so that if you have no energy left with your Storm Raven, when you use it, so you use it exactly when you have 4 energy, it does 1 additional damage. So it'll be 2 damage at base, and then it will do 1 additional damage if you have no energy left. This will make it far more playable, and I think will make it actually good at its intended job, which is dealing with the board, dealing damage to the board, and actually killing troops which are low in life, which is what we want to see. That's what Storm Raven's meant to do. It just doesn't do it right now, as there's a lot of free health units, and that needs to change because of it. The final thing which needs change, which I will mention with Tactical Insight, is Avenging Zeal. Now, with the change of Tactical Insight will help Avenging Zeal, but I still think Avenging Zeal, as it stands, is actually just a really bad card. It's just cost too much. Giving +2/+2 to all your units is perfectly fine, but at 10 energy, it's not worthwhile. It's just far too expensive. Now, of course, decreasing cost by 1 is fine, but often you can only get -3 cost on this as it stands, so 7 costs, so it will be better with Tactical Insight, how I've changed it, so it's triggered a codex to a friendly unit for 0 energy, meaning that it will cost slightly less, but I still don't think you're getting to the stage where you get into the late game, you know, you go through quite a few good cards, it still can be quite easily just 7 energy and not worth playing at all. When it should be by that point. It's been stuck in your hand for like 6 turns at that point, and you just only managed to trigger codex 3 times because you're, and I'm talking about specifically codex based decks. I'm not saying these decks are like massively like have hardly any codex units. I'm saying these decks focus on codex, and they just can't, because otherwise they're just not good. And Avenging Zeal is just not a good card for it. So my suggestion is change Avenging Zeal so it costs 9 instead of 10. I'm being a bit cautious. I'm saying if we decreased it back to 8 again, which I would actually think is the fair point considering how Tactical Insight will be. The reason why I'm decreasing it to 9 is just to make sure that a new Tactical Insight doesn't make it too easy to get this off. If so, maybe 10 would be fair, but I'll be heavily surprised, and I think 9 cost might even be too expensive, to be frankly honest. But it's still, no doubt in my mind, still needs some kind of energy cost, so I would change Avenging Zeal on this purpose. Next up, when I go into troops now, the troops I'd like to see change. This one, when I go through several things. Come on, there we go. Right. So it's not really mostly this. It's, well, it's, where is it? Primary Synthesizer. Primary Synthesizer, I'm sure you will agree, for 2 energy, putting it in your deck, having this unit, is a bad card. It's a 2/2 with 3 life. It's not a good card. You got Firstborn, which is just straight up better because it scales over time, and guess what? It comes out with basically 3 range and 3 life. So it has +1 range, +1 life. Well, not +1 life, but comes with +1 range at base over it. That's Firstborn for you. It's just straight up better in my personal opinion. So that means there's no reason why to play Primary Synthesizer for 2 energy, but that's fine. The reason why that's fine is because there's a lot of cards which synergize it, like Primary Impulsor and Angels of Death, which spawn in those guys. Primary Impulsor does it, spawning them on Codex. So I'm fine with that being the case, but it does mean that these cards need to be good, and personally I think particularly Angels of Death is a bad card, and so hence if they both struggle a little bit, well, let's buff the Primary Impulsor. So how would I change it? I'd change it so that Primary Synthesizer simply does 3 range attack. This is a simple change which would make Primus and Pulsar, that just slight bit better, making it not too strong at all in my opinion. Primus and Pulsar is not to become busted at this point, but will certainly be far more playable with Primus and Intercessor. However, with Angels of Death, I think will be a really actually make Angels of Death quite a decent card. Problem is Angels of Death, to explain, is that these guys only have 3 life. So if you go along and attack a target to do 6 damage to it as it stands, all you guys die. You basically get no tempo, you're just like trading at best, and if worse, you're not trading, because that's what they get, 1 point of armor, and that really hampers at Angels of Death to actually killing anything. This is why I say that they have increased range attack, so they get that free range attack. This makes them Pulsar better, but also Angel of Death becomes far more of a playable card and actually does its job in killing things, and that's what I like to see. Next up, when I go into troops, when I go into the 5NG section, this is particularly with the concept that it's difficult to get into the late game to play Ultramarine vehicles to be worthwhile, which is what we want to see. So the 2 changes I want to see is the Invicta Warsuit and Primus Tragicia. So Invicta Warsuit first. So basically, the change where it does actually 2 damage on death is far more better, but it still has low stats, which is fine because it's got quite decent ability. But the problem is that they can get around the ability, and they're like, well, it shoots on death. How do they get around the ability? They get around it with a stratagem. It doesn't shoot on death against stratagems. This is just a thing. And hence I find this problematic, because what they do, maybe they send 1 troop into it with really low life, so it doesn't die to this anyway, and they'd use a stratagem to remove it, and then it's as if they never was there. At that point, you'd be better off playing an Aggressor Sergeant, which has more life and has better stats, because it's still going to die to the Aggressor Sergeant with 5/5. It can't not trade with it inefficiently. So yeah, I find it really cool in concept, and I really appreciate this card, how it can protect some other units, which I really love to see. However, as it stands, it doesn't quite do its job properly. So I'd like to see camouflage on this unit. You might be like, what's the lore reason and why this guy can have camouflage? Well, guess what? This is actually a stealth dreadnought. That might sound ridiculous, mate, but it's how it works. It is a stealth dreadnought. You can, on the tabletop, you can deploy it forward and all that stuff. Some kind of thing for replacing its stealth, for example, Sergeant Talion is actually a scout. It can scout forward. It's its whole purpose. Scouts get camouflage. This guy gets camouflage. Scout bikes have camouflage. It'll be nice to see that this also supports that kind of archetype of a scout sort of dreadnought, which is in theory what it's meant to be. So some sort of fan of camouflage would be absolutely brilliant, and I think that would really achieve its purpose in being this defensive sort of piece. It'll be an all-round good piece, and they can't just simply get past its ability with stratagems. They have to actually deal with it, or they just take damage on just while trying to attack face, for example, which is they can still do. This is not just a pure vanguard. So yes, that's what I like to change about it. Now, Primus Tragicia, yes, this is one of the units which would seriously get benefited with the new tactical site change. I accept that. However, this is the thing. I think it still doesn't quite... It's not good enough in its role. And what its role is a vanguard and then also stun. It can do the stun. That hasn't changed. Tactical Insight will enable it to do its stun role as it should have always been able to do, really. But right now, it has the difficulty of not actually being a proper vanguard. What I mean by that, it just too easily dies to stuff. There's a lot of things which can quite comfortably do 5 damage in this game now, and they do it on range attack. There's so much range attack 5 damage right now out there. So as a 5 energy unit, I request there is 6 life, so it fills its role of actually being a proper vanguard. Next up, we've gone into 2 changes, the Inceptor Sergeant and Lieutenant Calus. Yes, these are some of the better cards, but personally I think the 6 energy things for Ultramarines are really, really bad. You got like Desolation Marine, which is don't even talk about. A Company Ancient, which struggles in just doing nothing, and supposedly supports a go wide board. Like, it's great if you manage to get the go wide board and then play this, but you have to try and do that. It doesn't do both, for example. It doesn't have a rally deploy another guy or anything like that. It can't do that. The Stormplate Speed of Hellstrike doesn't do enough to clear the board and has poor stats. Like, the only 3 which are half decent is the Blade Guard, and it is quite decent at stalling the game. I will be honest, it's a bit of an annoying piece to deal with that armor one. However, it's not amazing at it. And then you got these two, and these are the two I want changed. Lieutenant Calus has the difficulty of kind of like Justicia, where there's a whole bunch of flank troops in this day and age with high range attack. And having only 3 range attack really gets punished. It means that you have to send something else into the troop to actually be able to properly deal with it. Where if it did 4 range attack, which is what I'm changing it to, it means that that flank troop, which has 6 range attack, kills it. It takes 4 damage back, and then you're able to trade against it with your warlord. It's not the smartest idea to trade it against your warlord, because quite often you take a lot of damage back if you do that. But it's not the end of the world either if you were able to do that. If you had like no other choice, no other play. For example, you had another slow 6 energy tempo loss sort of play. That is a change I'd absolutely love to see. Something to make Lieutenant Calus just so it's not just so simple as, we do range attack against it and it's not going to punish you whatsoever. Now it will actually punish people. Next up is Inceptor Sergeant. And personally, I'd love to see some kind of change to this so that it had increased life. 7 life, I would put it at. The reason why is that I don't want it to be like identical copy to like a veteran Storm Boy or like that, just in reverse with the 6 range attack. Yes, 6 range attack would totally make the Inceptor Sergeant very strong. But I think I think it just needs that little bit extra. Yes, it means that with that only 5 range attack, you're going to have to send your Warlord most of the time to deal with another 6 energy troop if you use a 6 Scepter Sergeant. But at least your Scepter Sergeant was also most likely be on decent life. So it's able to go along, trade that with your Warlord, so your Warlord's going to take damage, but then you still have like a 3 life, like /4 life unit still alive, being able to deal with the opponent's stuff. And so hence they have to actually commit to it. I will say, I will preface, you're still going to have to use your Warlord to actually take the damage. It's not like a true flanker like with the Orcs have, where they do 6 damage and it actually will kill the target. You need to do something else to actually able to take out those targets with an Inceptor Sergeant. Most likely your Warlord taking a bit of damage. But it does mean that the opponent actually has to spend resources in dealing with it and not just getting to deal with it, and your Warlord takes damage as well. You know, for free. So that's what we don't want to see. We want to see it force your opponent to spend a bit of extra resources on it as well. The final thing is Redemptor Dreadnought. This is going to the concept that Ultramarines really struggle with the board clear, and this will give you a late game option, unlike the Storm Raven, which is your early game option. This will actually give you a proper late game option in dealing with the board. This is something I think we need to see as the Ultramarines. So what am I changing it to? Deal 2 damage to all enemy troops. I will press of that again, troops only. We don't need any direct face damage. We certainly don't need it when we have board clears. The Redemptor Dreadnought doing guaranteed 2 damage, but then only troops, means that that extra damage doesn't happen to the enemy Warlord. And it's not really there. It shouldn't be there for just trying to do damage to the enemy Warlord. I don't think it should be. It should be there to deal with the opponent's board. That is what I'd love to see a change in when it comes to Redemptor Dreadnought. Guaranteed 2 damage, because you've seen multiple times, I've seen it at least, where you get a double Codex play on a Redemptor Dreadnought. There's like 6 enemy troops, all with 3 life, let's say. You do 1-2 to damage them, and guess what? There's still 3 units still alive, all with 1 life. And you can only use the last one of them with your Warlord. That still leaves 2 units, both still alive, and you just did a massive double Codex Redemptor Dreadnought play. Yeah, and it's not fun when you see that. So I'd absolutely love to see a change to Redemptor Dreadnought so that it does guarantee 2 damage, but it doesn't need to do it to face. We don't need to see face damage. It's not its purpose. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. See you next time.